Welcome to the 700 Club. We've got a story for you today about the scandal in the Catholic Church, which makes me very, very sad. But it's beginning to point to the Pope. And was he indeed part of a cover-up of these things that are happening? Well, we'll get you that story later on, and a lot of other things. But I'm sure the lead story is going to be the fact the nation is honoring John McCain for his lifetime of service. He was, as a POW in Vietnam, he endured torture and deprivation. As a senator, he gained a reputation as a maverick for speaking his mind and obviously crossing party lines. Terry.
Well, in 2008, he won the Republican Party nomination for president before losing to Barack Obama. In the end, he wanted to be remembered as a man who served his country. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has this look at the life of John McCain.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are remembering their dear friend and colleague, Senator John McCain, who passed away on Saturday after battling brain cancer at the age of 81.
It was tough. I'm going to miss him.
Democratic Minority Leader Chuck Schumer described his longtime Republican colleague as a truly great person and announced he plans to introduce a resolution to rename a Senate office building after the war hero. President Trump tweeted his condolences to the family of John McCain, a man who served his country with distinction for more than 60 years, beginning in 1958. That's when he graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and headed to the service as a naval aviator. During the Vietnam War, McCain's plane was shot down in 1967, leading to his capture and lifelong physical disabilities. As a prisoner of war, McCain turned down a chance at early release because of his father's rank. He chose instead to remain imprisoned with his fellow American soldiers until 1973. McCain left the Navy to pursue politics in 1981. Arizona voters elected him to 2 terms in the House of Representatives before sending him to the Senate in 1986.
I've been a member of the United States Senate for 30 years. I had another long, if not as long, career before I arrived here. Another profession that was profoundly rewarding, and in which I had experiences and friendships that I revere. But make no mistake, my service here is the most important job I've had in my life.
McCain ran for president twice in his lifetime. He lost to George W. Bush in the 2000 primaries, and 8 years later became the Republican nominee, taking on fellow Senator Barack Obama, who won the White House. Both former presidents have been asked to give eulogies at his funeral.
John McCain is not just an American hero because of what he did in the war back in the day in Vietnam. He's an American hero right there on the floor of the United States Senate as well.
Is there any member of the United States Senate that has read this?
Throughout his political career, McCain earned a reputation of being a maverick for voting against his own party. His most recent stand came when he gave an infamous thumbs down that killed the Republican attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare.
He really did want to work across the aisle in a bipartisan way, and that is a lost art in Washington, D.C.
In one of his final speeches on the Senate floor, McCain implored his fellow senators to work together again to get things done for the American people.
Let's trust each other. Let's return to regular order. We've been spinning our wheels on too many important issues because we keep trying to find a way to win without help from across the aisle. That's an approach that's been employed by both sides, mandating legislation from the top down without any support from the other side, with all the parliamentary maneuvers that requires. We're getting nothing done, my friends. We're getting nothing done.
Senator McCain will lie in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda before his memorial service at the National Cathedral. He'll be laid to rest on the grounds of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis on September 2nd.
And I hope to impress on you again that it is an honor to serve the American people in your company. Thank you, fellow senators. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Well, the question that people are asking now is who will replace McCain, because it's a razor-thin majority in the Senate, and with the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice and others, it is vitally important for the Republicans to maintain at least a slim majority, and with McCain gone. So Arizona's Republican Governor, Doug Ducey, will announce John McCain's replacement next week after the memorial. So well, I'm sure he will appoint a Republican. It's just a question of who. Well, in other news, the U.S. is taking action to stop the Palestinian Authority from giving money to terrorists. Fantastic. John Jessup has more.
Thanks, Pat. The United States is cutting more than $200 million in aid to the Palestinian Authority. In notifying Congress, the State Department said it would redirect the money to, quote, high-priority projects elsewhere. The decision comes after a review of U.S. assistance to the PA. The funding had been in question for years due to the controversial policy known as pay to slay, a compensation plan for Palestinians who attack Israelis. The Taylor Force Act, which targeted that policy and threatens U.S. aid, Pat, was made earlier this year.
Well, there's something else that's got to be done. They want to take off the table the so-called right of return. This has been a sticking point for years. There's a United Nations called the UN Relief and Public Works, UNRWA, and all they do is stir up trouble with Palestinians. They have kept them in virtual bondage for years. They are in segregated camps still, and we are paying a large part of the keep of that awful agency. It should be abolished. And what they do is tell these Palestinians, we're going to get you your land back. Now, what happens when the Arabs invaded Israel, they told their followers, if you will surrender, get out of your land and join with us, then when you come back in, you will be able to have the land. And this is the land not only for them, but for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and so forth. Well, the truth is, Israel took over the land. The Palestinians didn't have it anymore. And this UN agency's been there stirring up trouble ever since. So it's a very important thing that if we're going to deny funding, that's one of the agencies that should be abolished like yesterday. John?
Well, Pat, as you were just saying, the American Embassy in Jerusalem declined to comment on a media report that the Trump administration would take the so-called right of return off the negotiating table. Right of return is the idea that Palestinian refugees from 1948 and millions of their descendants could return to their homes in Israel.
This is the first time since 1949 that an American government has said we're going to stand up against the right of return because we see how lethal it is and how ridiculous it is. The Trump administration can act as a model for all 68 nations that give money to the Palestinian Authority and to UNRWA. Maybe that will happen.
The administration is expected to release its peace proposal in the near future. Well, a former high-ranking Vatican official is calling on Pope Francis to resign after accusing the Pope and others of not taking action sooner against a former cardinal who recently stepped down over allegations of sexual abuse. In an 11-page letter, Archbishop Carlo Vigano, the former papal nuncio, accuses several senior church officials of ignoring reports of abuse by ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. He said Vatican officials knew as early as 2000 that McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, had sexual relations with seminary students, but they promoted him anyway. Vigano said Pope Francis took back sanctions put on McCarrick by Pope Benedict, claiming he was rehabilitated. McCarrick resigned last month after an investigation found credible evidence he sexually abused a minor. Pat, back to you.
It's a terrible thing. I'm just so sorry. I'm not happy to see a scandal. But this goes all the way. You know, Pope Benedict was a marvelous man. I have a copy of his book, Jesus of Nazareth, and his study of the Bible was right in accordance with the way I was taught to do it in seminary. I mean, he's a terrific Bible scholar, but he just said, I can't handle the bureaucracy of the papacy. Well, it may be some of the scandals he just didn't want to deal with. So he was an unusual pope that he said, I'm going to resign, which just doesn't happen. Now this new pope has come in, and apparently the archbishop, the cardinal who was guilty of rampant sexual abuse of little children was put on suspension by Pope Benedict, and now the new Pope has restored him, given him back his privileges, and traveled with him, and they're close friends apparently. And the papal nuncio, who's come to America, is calling for the Pope to resign. But you wonder if you're going to put a man like the coach of Ohio State on suspension because he didn't deal with spousal abuse among his assistants. How does a pope get away with not dealing with something as serious as this? And it may be that the days of the Holy Father are over. He's a nice man. A lot of people like him, but he's certainly stirred up a lot of trouble. And I don't think the Catholic Church wants this. They need to clean house. It's just too bad. You can't leave this thing around. And more, there's that grand jury in Pennsylvania that found, 1,000 cases of sexual abuse. I mean, it's just shocking what's been happening. And I think our dear brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church need to face up to it and take the appropriate disciplinary action. It's been going on too long. John?
Pat, President Trump is growing increasingly vocal about his displeasure with Attorney General Jeff Sessions and his decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Now members of the GOP are voicing their opinions on the embattled AG, weighing in on whether he should stay or should he go. Washington correspondent Amber Strong has a story.
A potential rift is growing inside of the GOP over the future of Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
The president's entitled to attorney general he has faith in, somebody that's qualified for the job.
While some back the president's frustrations, others are stressing caution.
I can tell you as a body, we're saying please don't.
The president hammered Sessions over his decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation.
Jeff Sessions never took control of the Justice Department. He took the job and then he said, I'm going to recuse myself. I said, what kind of a man is this?
Sessions responded to the president's jab, saying, quote, the actions of the Department of Justice will not be improperly influenced by political considerations. All this comes after former Trump attorney Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations and accused the president of ordering him to do it, an investigation that started with Robert Mueller's Russia probe. Democrats aren't talking impeachment yet, but should they take the House in November, they'll begin their own investigations.
We should be investigating all of these things, the possible interference of the Russians in our investigations, what we can do to make sure that that can't happen again, who in the United States aided and abetted that.
Legal scholar Alan Dershowitz says the case for impeachment simply isn't there.
I fully understand why so many people hope that President Trump has committed crimes and impeachable offenses, but the evidence isn't there.
And more legal news surrounding the president. Trump's CFO Alan Weisselberg and National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, a friend of the president, were also given immunity to testify to New York prosecutors in the case surrounding Michael Cohen. Still, many of the president's supporters point out none of this has anything to do with Russian collusion. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Amber. And the GOP expects a flood of investigations into the president, his administration, and his former business dealings if Democrats take back the House. Axios is reporting Democrats have so far requested about 100 investigations. And, Pat, that spans nearly every single congressional committee.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, we have elected a president, and this country needs to get behind its president. We only have one. And he is the man responsible for foreign affairs. He's responsible for our military. He's responsible for laying out a budget. He's responsible for a host of regulations. And to have him embroiled in continuous controversy, it's, you know, the Democrats may think they're doing themselves a favor, but they are destroying our nation. We can't allow it to happen. Now, it's what I understand the law is. If a cabinet member has already been vetted and he's in the cabinet, if Sessions is removed as Attorney General, another cabinet member can move laterally without having to have Senate confirmation on his appointment because he's already been confirmed. So there may be some other cabinet members who could be moved in. But I think Jeff Sessions, who's a very fine person, has done ill service to the president. We shouldn't be having, for example, a special prosecutor. If Sessions had been there, they could have done it. You know, Dershowitz made a great suggestion. He said they should have a commission. If you got Russian meddling, all right, appoint a commission to study it. Don't make it a legal matter where you've got a crime coming up, but don't do it that way. But they did it that way. And Dershowitz has also pointed out to something very important. The Attorney General is supposed to be the lawyer for the president. And so he's a confidential attorney who's advising the president on legal matters. At the same time, he's running the Justice Department, which is supposed to bring lawsuits, maybe even against the president. So Dershowitz is saying we should split those functions. And he may be right, but it's too late to do it now. But nevertheless, for the Attorney General to say we won't let politics come into the issue, of course politics is in it because he is the advisor to the chief politician. It's amazing. Terry?
It's a mess. It's quite a mess.
They've got to stop it. A house divided will not stand. We cannot allow our country to be divided this way. We cannot do it. Yeah. The Democrats aren't helping us. We cannot have this extreme party spirit going on where I'm trying to one-up the other guy. It's for the nation we're talking about, for the good of this country.